The sterile air of operating room 4 smelled faintly of iodine and metallic blood, but Dr. Elena Vance only heard the frantic, irregular beep of the cardiac monitor. Her gloved fingers hovered 2 inches above an open chest cavity, bathed in the harsh white glare of the surgical lamp as the cooler holding the donor heart was wheeled through the double doors. She reached out to sign the organ release form, her eyes casually dropping to the donor's legal name printed on the cold thermal paper. In an instant, the scalpel in her right hand went still. The room around her seemed to lose all sound, and her pulse spiked higher than the dying patient's on the table, because the donor lying cold in the morgue upstairs was Arthur Pendleton, the man who had walked free 8 years ago, after leaving her younger brother to burn alive in a crushed sedan. The quiet hum of the bypass machine was the only sound tethering the room to reality, as Elena stood frozen, her eyes glued to the signature block on the donor sheet. Blood rushed through her ears with the force of a subterranean river, washing away the scrub nurse's urgent voice, asking if she was ready to inspect the graft. Her hand trembled inside the powder-free latex, a subtle microtremor that had never occurred in all her 11 years as chief of transplant surgery at St. Jude's. For nearly a decade, she had rehearsed the speech she would make if she ever stood face to face with Arthur Pendleton, but she had never envisioned his heart arriving in an insulated cooler, still warm, waiting for her blessing to grant another human being 20 more years of life. How could a man who had ripped the beat from her brother's chest now offer his own to save a complete stranger? At 38, Dr. Elena Vance was known throughout the hospital network as an icy monolith of pure efficiency, a woman who calculated surgical risk with the cold detachment of a chess grandmaster. She lived alone in a minimalist high-rise apartment overlooking the harbor, kept her stainless steel kitchen immaculate, and drank black espresso while reviewing patient files at 4 in the morning. She had no husband, no children, and no social life beyond the surgical floor, having systematically severed every emotional attachment after the night her brother Leo was killed on a rain-slicked highway. Her entire existence was built on an unrelenting obsession with control, a psychological fortress designed to ensure no sudden loss could ever break her again. Yet, as she looked down at the pale, ice-packed myocardial tissue resting in the blue transport basin, she realized that every barrier she had built over 8 agonizing years was about to crumble under the weight of a single impossible choice. The patient waiting on the operating table was 19-year-old Clara Brooks, a gifted music student whose heart was failing due to a rare fulminant myocarditis. Clara had spent 3 months on ECMO support, her frail body deteriorating so rapidly that her family had already been advised to prepare for end-of-life care until this miraculous, late-night donor match materialized. Elena had spent weeks reassuring Clara's terrified mother, promising that if a heart became available, she would personally guarantee the girl's survival. But now, staring at the organ that once belonged to the monster who destroyed her family, Elena felt an acidic wave of revulsion rise in her throat. Could she really transplant the vital essence of her brother's killer into an innocent young girl, or was this twist of fate an invitation to deliver the ultimate silent retribution? Elena stepped back from the operating table, her boots making a sticky sound against the linoleum floor, and motioned for her resident, Dr. Eris Thorne, to hold the line. She pulled off her outer gloves, threw them into the biohazard bin, and walked briskly into the scrub room, splashing cold water against her face until her skin stung. Through the glass pane, she watched Eris monitor Clara's failing vitals while the anesthesiologist adjusted the vasopressor drip to keep the girl from slipping into irreversible shock. Elena knew that if she delayed the procedure by more than 20 minutes, the ischemia time would render the donor heart unusable, effectively sealing Clara's death sentence without Elena ever having to make a single incision. Was her hesitation a legitimate clinical pause to verify donor integrity, or had she already begun executing a passive murder to avenge her brother? Returning to the operating theater with fresh gloves, Elena demanded the complete, unredacted donor file from the organ procurement team, refusing to proceed until every line of toxicology and trauma history was verified. The file stated that Arthur Pendleton had been declared brain dead 3 hours earlier following a high-speed vehicle rollover on the city outskirts, a grimly ironic echo of the accident that had taken her brother's life years before. But as Elena turned to the second page of the coroner's preliminary report, a strange discrepancy caught her eye. The blood toxicity panel was completely clean, yet the police report noted that Arthur had driven off an empty, straight stretch of road without hitting the brakes or turning the wheel. Why would a man with no alcohol or drugs in his system drive straight off a clear cliffside on the exact night Clara Brooks reached the top of the emergency transplant list? Elena's mind raced back to the rainy November night 8 years ago when 19-year-old Leo had been broadsided at an intersection 3 blocks from their family home. Arthur Pendleton, then a rising executive at a powerful real estate conglomerate owned by Elena's wealthy uncle, had been arrested at the scene with a blood alcohol level twice the legal limit. Yet, during the trial, a sudden power surge miraculously corrupted the police dashcam footage. Key witnesses changed their testimonies under mysterious circumstances, and Arthur walked away with a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation. Elena's father, devastated by the loss of his son and broken by the obvious corruption of the justice system, took his own life 6 months later, leaving Elena completely alone in a world she no longer trusted. Now, looking at the donor documentation, she saw that the notary who signed Arthur's sudden organ donation registry paper just 48 hours ago was none other than Marcus Vance, her own estranged uncle. The realization struck her like a physical blow, sending a chill down her spine that made her hands shake violently inside her surgical attire. Marcus Vance was a cutthroat billionaire who had cut ties with Elena's immediate family after Leo's death, claiming that her father's public accusations against Arthur Pendleton were damaging the family firm's public reputation. For 8 years, Elena had believed Marcus was simply a cold-hearted capitalist protecting his corporate brand at the expense of his own blood. But why would Marcus be listed as the legal power of attorney who authorized the emergency harvest of Arthur Pendleton's organs after a single vehicle crash? She pulled Eris aside, her voice dropping to a harsh, rapid whisper that barely carried over the mechanical hiss of the ventilator. She ordered him to run an immediate, high-resolution HLA cross-match analysis on the donor tissue and the recipient, pretending she suspected a rare antibody mismatch that could trigger hyperacute rejection. Eris looked at her with a mix of confusion and alarm, reminding her that the regional organ bank had already completed 2 separate compatibility checks before dispatching the cooler. Elena cut him off with a look so fierce that the young resident stepped back in silence, quickly grabbing the tissue sample to run to the pathology lab downstairs. As the lab doors swung shut behind him, Elena realized she was no longer just operating on a patient. She was navigating a crime scene where every medical protocol was being manipulated by an invisible hand. While waiting for the lab results, Elena walked over to the prep bay where Clara's mother, Sarah Brooks, sat in a vinyl armchair, clutching a worn wooden rosary to her chest. Sarah looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow with exhaustion, searching Elena's face for a glimmer of hope or a signal that the long night was almost over. When Elena asked gently if Sarah had ever met the donor family or received any prior notice about the organ availability, Sarah's hands tightened around the beads so hard her knuckles turned white. She hesitated, looking nervously toward the corridor as if checking to see if anyone was listening, before whispering that a wealthy patron had paid for Clara's private ICU room 3 weeks ago, under the condition of strict anonymity. Who was this mysterious benefactor, and why was his intervention tied so precisely to the death of the man who ruined Elena's life? A soft chime from Elena's encrypted hospital tablet broke the heavy silence of the corridor, signaling an incoming message from the pathology lab. She swiped the screen open, expecting to see standard tissue typing markers, but instead found an urgent note flagged in bright red text by the chief pathologist. The DNA profile from the donor's pericardial swab did not match the medical records submitted by the county coroner for Arthur Pendleton. The blood group was compatible, but the genetic markers proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the body lying on the donor table upstairs was not Arthur Pendleton at all. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her feet as a terrifying wave of vertigo washed over her. If the body on the donor table wasn't Arthur Pendleton, whose heart was currently sitting in the cooler inside operating room 4. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Elena abandoned her post, sprinted up the service staircase, and pushed through the heavy double doors, leading to the pathology department's cold storage facility. The room was freezing, filled with the sterile stench of formaldehyde and the hum of industrial refrigeration units that echoed like hollow groans off the stainless steel walls. She navigated the rows of metallic gurneys, until she found the tray tagged with the emergency donor identification number corresponding to the heart in her OR. Breathing heavily, her heart hammering against her ribs, she grabbed the chrome handle and pulled the heavy drawer open, peeling back the white canvas sheet to expose the face of the deceased donor. The face beneath the sheet was weathered, lined with deep scars around the jaw, and completely unfamiliar. It belonged to a middle-aged man Elena had never seen before in her life. But as her eyes moved down to the dead man's left collarbone, she froze. Inked into his skin was an old, faded military tattoo depicting a silver dagger wrapped in a banner bearing the date of Leo's death. This wasn't a random accident victim, nor was it the wealthy corporate executive who had avoided prison 8 years ago. Elena pulled the sheet further down, searching for any other identifying marks, and noticed a surgical scar running down the man's chest, a scar that matched the exact footprint of an open-heart procedure performed right here at St. Jude's nearly a decade ago. A sudden sound behind her made Elena turn around instantly, her heart leaping into her throat as a shadow crossed the frosted glass door of the cold storage room. She grabbed a heavy steel tray from a nearby counter, holding her breath as the door clicked open and a figure stepped into the dim, blue-tinted light of the morgue. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, her resident, holding a tablet with a look of pale, terror-stricken urgency that matched her own state of shock. He told her that he had just accessed the hospital's archived surgical logs from 9 years ago using her administrative bypass password, and what he found rewrote everything they knew about the night Leo died. The archived records revealed that 9 years ago, 8 months before the fateful car crash, Leo Vance had been diagnosed with a terminal, degenerative cardiomyopathy that was kept entirely secret from Elena and her parents. Leo knew he had less than a year to live unless he received a heart transplant, but his rare blood type made finding a compatible donor almost mathematically impossible through standard legal waiting lists. The man lying on the cold gurney before them was Julian Vance, a distant black sheep cousin who had disappeared from the family dynamic years ago after being convicted of fraud. Julian had agreed to act as a private, illegal living donor for Leo in exchange for a massive offshore trust fund set up by Elena's father and her uncle Marcus. Elena listened in stunned silence, her mind struggling to process the web of lies that had defined her entire adult life and driven her into surgical solitude. If Leo was already dying of heart disease, why had he been driving recklessly on that rain-slicked highway 8 years ago, and why had Arthur Pendleton been framed for a drunk driving homicide that never actually happened? Eris tapped the tablet screen, pulling up a series of encrypted wire transfers made on the exact night of the crash between Marcus Vance's corporate account and Arthur Pendleton's private firm. The transfers were labeled as settlement payments for a staging operation, an elaborate fake accident designed to cover up something far more sinister than a simple vehicular manslaughter. As the pieces began to collide in her head, Elena realized that the entire crash 8 years ago was a manufactured staged scene. Leo hadn't died from the collision impact. He had suffered a fatal cardiac arrest at the wheel due to his secret illness, causing his vehicle to veer out of control into Arthur Pendleton's stationary car. Marcus Vance, desperate to protect the family's stock value and prevent the public discovery of his illegal organ trading attempt with Julian, paid Arthur millions of dollars to take the blame for an alcohol-induced crash, knowing Arthur's high-powered lawyers could easily defeat the charges in court. Arthur hadn't been a murderer escaping justice. He had been a paid actor in a multi-million-dollar corporate cover-up designed to preserve the Vance family empire's pristine public image. But the horror of the present moment was far from over, because the heart currently sitting in the OR cooler upstairs was beating its last viable minutes away while Clara Brooks hovered on the brink of death. Elena looked back at the body on the gurney, realization dawning on her with the force of a thunderclap. This dead man, Julian, had been located by Marcus 3 days ago and forced to fulfill his original illegal organ contract after Clara's condition suddenly became critical. Clara wasn't just a random music student who got lucky on the transplant list. She was Marcus Vance's illegitimate daughter, born from a secret affair he had hidden from the family for nearly 2 decades. Marcus was sacrificing Julian to save his hidden daughter, using Elena's world-renowned surgical skills as the final unwitting instrument to complete his decade-old scheme. A sudden commotion erupted from the corridor outside, followed by the heavy footfalls of hospital security guards and the distinct, authoritative voice of Marcus Vance demanding access to the morgue floor. Elena exchanged a rapid glance with Eris, whose eyes were wide with panic as the footsteps grew closer with every passing second. Marcus was coming to ensure that the surgical operation proceeded without delay, intending to force Elena to put Julian's heart into Clara's chest before anyone could question the true origin of the organ or the body lying on the morgue table. Elena felt a cold rage ignite in her chest, replacing the grief and confusion that had paralyzed her for the past hour. She was finally staring into the eyes of the real monster who had destroyed her brother, drove her father to suicide, and manipulated her entire career. The morgue doors flew open, and Marcus Vance stepped into the room, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, flanked by 2 armed private security guards who immediately blocked the exit. Marcus looked at Elena with a calm, predatory composure, his voice smooth and devoid of any remorse, as he told her to return to the operating room and complete the procedure immediately. He explained that Clara's life was ticking away by the second, and that regardless of how the organ was procured, Elena had taken a Hippocratic oath to save the patient on her table. He warned her that if she blew the whistle now, she would not only destroy her own medical career and face criminal charges as an accessory, but she would also guarantee the immediate death of an innocent 19-year-old girl who had no knowledge of her father's crimes. Elena stood her ground, her body blocking the cold storage tray, her mind calculating every move with the same absolute precision she used during a complex arterial reconstruction. She looked at Marcus, seeing for the first time the pathetic desperation behind his polished exterior, a man who believed that money and power could control even the boundary between life and death. She quietly asked him if he truly believed he could build his daughter's life on the corpses of his own family members without paying the ultimate price. Marcus smiled faintly, stepping closer, telling her that history is written by the survivors, and that in 10 minutes the ischemia window on the donor heart would close forever, making her decision the sole determining factor in Clara's survival or death. With only 3 minutes left before the donor heart became permanently unviable, Elena made her choice, not out of revenge nor out of obedience to her uncle's extortion, but out of a profound commitment to the truth she had sworn to uphold. She looked Marcus directly in the eye and agreed to return to operating room 4 to perform the transplant, under one non-negotiable condition that she demanded right there in front of the security team. She demanded that Marcus step into the surgical gallery above OR4 to watch every single cut, stitch, and vessel tie of the operation, ensuring he was forced to witness the physical reality of the sacrifice he had engineered. Marcus hesitated for a moment, surprised by her sudden compliance, but ultimately nodded, believing he had successfully leveraged his niece's professional ethics to secure his daughter's life. 10 minutes later, the bright lights of operating room 4 illuminated the final preparation stage as Elena re-entered the scrub room, her movements calm, methodical, and devoid of any visible emotion. Above her, behind the dark tilted glass of the observation gallery, the outline of Marcus Vance stood watching her every move like a silent phantom judging her performance. Clara's heart monitor was flickering with dangerous arrhythmia, the waveform flattening into an erratic sawtooth pattern that signaled impending total cardiac collapse. Elena stepped up to the table, took the scalpel from the scrub nurse, and looked down at Clara's pale face, making a silent promise to the girl that her life would no longer be built on a foundation of hidden blood and corporate lies. The surgery proceeded with breathtaking speed and surgical perfection. Elena's hands moved with a master's precision, clamping the major vessels, excising Clara's diseased cardiac tissue, and lifting the donor heart from its cold bath. She carefully aligned the donor aorta with Clara's native vessel, her sutures stitching the tissue together with microscopic accuracy while Eris monitored the bypass pumps in tense silence. In the observation gallery, Marcus leaned against the railing, his knuckles white, watching the organ that had cost so many lives finally being sewn into his secret daughter's chest. Every movement Elena made was a masterclass in surgical art, a silent refusal to allow her uncle's corruption to poison the purity of the life-saving act happening beneath her hands. As the final vascular clamp was released, blood surged into the newly transplanted heart, warming the pale tissue until it flushed a vibrant, healthy pink under the surgical lights. The room held its collective breath as the anesthesiologist administered a mild electrical shock to jumpstart the rhythm, sending a sharp current through the internal paddles held against the myocardium. For 2 agonizing seconds, the monitor showed a flat line, the silence in the room so dense it felt heavy enough to crush them all. Then, with a sudden, powerful spike, the heart contractility returned, establishing a steady, perfect sinus rhythm of 60 beats per minute that echoed through the speakers like a drumbeat of absolute victory. Above in the gallery, Marcus let out a long breath of relief, a triumphant smile appearing on his face as he watched his daughter's vital signs stabilize to levels she hadn't seen in months. He turned toward the gallery exit, ready to leave the hospital and begin sweeping away the loose ends of his elaborate cover-up before the morning news cycles began. But as he reached for the door handle, 2 federal agents in dark suits stepped into the gallery doorway, holding an active federal arrest warrant and a set of steel handcuffs. Marcus froze, his smile instantly vanishing as he turned back to look down through the observation glass at his niece standing in the operating room below. Elena looked up through the glass at her uncle, holding his gaze without a single trace of fear or hesitation as the agents forced his hands behind his back. While she was performing the delicate vascular anastomoses on Clara's heart, her tablet on the scrub nurse's station had been broadcasting a continuous, encrypted live feed of the morgue's internal security footage directly to the state prosecutor's office and the Department of Justice. Every word Marcus had spoken in the cold storage room, his admission of the staged crash, his illegal procurement of Julian's organs, and his extortion attempt, had been recorded in high-definition audio and video, crushing his corporate immunity forever. The tragic reality of the entire web revealed itself in its final, devastating symmetry as Marcus was led away in chains through the hospital corridors. Elena had saved Clara's life, fulfilling her duty as a doctor, but she had also ensured that the corrupt empire built on her brother's memory was utterly destroyed. The heart beating inside Clara's chest was not a symbol of Marcus's ultimate triumph, but the physical evidence that would secure his permanent imprisonment for human trafficking, murder, and evidence tampering. The long nightmare that had frozen Elena's life 8 years ago was finally over, but as she stripped off her blood-stained surgical gown, the absolute weight of what her family had endured descended upon her with crushing force. 6 months later, Clara Brooks stood on the steps of the conservatory, her cheeks flush with healthy color, holding a violin case as she laughed with her classmates under the bright autumn sun. She had no knowledge of the dark web of conspiracy, murder, and sacrifice that had brought her that second chance at life, knowing only that a brilliant surgeon had fought through the night to give her a future. Standing across the street under the shade of an oak tree, Elena watched the young girl pull her coat tight against the cool wind, noticing the vibrant, energetic rhythm in Clara's step that only a healthy heart could provide. For the first time in 8 years, Elena didn't feel the icy grip of grief tightening around her chest, nor did she feel the obsessive need to control every single second of her remaining existence. Elena turned away from the conservatory and walked down toward the harbor, pulling her dark coat close against the rising ocean breeze that swept across the water. She knew that true justice didn't always arrive in neat, untainted packages, and that sometimes the truth demands that we confront the worst horrors within our own bloodlines to save what is genuinely innocent. She pulled her phone from her pocket, looked at a small, faded photograph of Leo smiling on a summer beach years ago, and finally let go of the pain that had defined her life for so long. In life, the darkest secrets we keep to protect ourselves often become the very cages that prevent us from healing, showing that real justice requires the courage to uncover the truth, no matter how deep it has been buried. What would you have done if you were forced to save a life using the truth that destroyed your own family? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.